All right, let's talk about the habit loop. Today, we're going to dive into this powerful, invisible force that pretty much runs our lives and discover how our brains can just switch to complete autopilot. So let's just jump right in with a real head-scratcher. How could you possibly form a new habit if you couldn't form any new memories? I mean, that sounds completely impossible, doesn't it? To really get into this, we need to meet a man named Eugene Polly. And the best way to understand what he was going through comes from this one just devastating moment. His wife mentions their son, Michael, is coming over. And Eugene, with a completely blank expression, just asks, "Who's Michael?" Think about that. That one question tells you everything you need to know about how much of his memory was just gone.
So what happened to him? Well, he got sick with something called viral encephalitis. And what's crazy is it was caused by a super common virus, the kind that gives you a cold sore. But for Eugene, it found its way into his brain and just wiped out the part responsible for making and storing memories.
And this is where things get really weird. This is the heart of the mystery. Look at this. Eugene couldn't tell you his doctor's name or what day it was. He couldn't even draw you a simple map of his own house. And yet, he could still cook himself bacon and eggs, he could always find the bathroom, and this is the one that baffled everyone, he could go for a walk and find his way home every single time. So how on earth was that possible?
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into this man without a memory. I mean, just try to picture this. A researcher asks him, "Hey, can you draw a map of your house?" And he's totally lost. He has no idea where the kitchen is compared to the bedroom. In his conscious mind, there was just no map. But then, literally moments later, he'd get up, walk down the hall, turn, and go right into the bathroom. No hesitation at all. See, this wasn't memory doing the work. This had to be something else, something deeper, more automatic. So to crack this case, scientists realized they had to go look inside the brain itself. They had to find the part that was running the show completely separate from our conscious memory. A good way to think about it is that the brain is kind of like an onion. You've got the outer layers, right? That's for all the complex stuff, reasoning, creativity. But as you go deeper, you get to the older, more primitive parts. And way down deep inside, there's this little structure called the basal ganglia. And a bunch of scientists at MIT had a hunch that this little golf ball-sized thing, that was the secret to habits.
So what did they do? They set up this really simple but brilliant experiment. They took some rats and a maze. Here's how it worked. A loud click sounds, a little door opens, and at the other end of the maze, there's a piece of chocolate. Simple, right? The whole point was to see what was happening inside the rat's brain while it was learning the path. Okay, so the first time the rat goes through the maze, its brain is just on fire. It's lighting up everywhere. It's working like crazy, sniffing, scratching, processing every little detail. You can see it's actively thinking, It's trying to figure this whole thing out. But then, after about a week of doing this over and over, something amazing happened. The brain activity just plummeted. It went almost completely quiet while the rat was running the maze. Except for two little moments. There was a spike right at the beginning when it heard the click, and another spike at the very end when it got the chocolate. The rest of the time, the brain was basically on autopilot. And this process actually has a name. It's called chunking, and it's basically the brain's ultimate efficiency hack. It takes a whole sequence of actions, like running through a maze, or for us, maybe backing a car out of the driveway, and it bundles it all up, chunks it together into one automatic routine. Why? To save effort. And that, right there, is how a habit is born.
And all this research pointed to one simple but incredibly powerful idea that explains everything: the habit loop.
It's a three-step process, super straightforward. First, you've got the cue. That's the trigger that tells your brain, okay, time to go on autopilot. Then you have the routine. That's the actual behavior, the thing you do. And finally, there's the reward. That's the good stuff that tells your brain, hey, this whole loop, it's worth remembering for next time.
And the more you repeat this loop, cue, routine, reward, the more automatic it gets. The wiring in your brain gets stronger and stronger. Eventually, the cue and the reward get so tangled up that just getting the cue creates this powerful feeling of anticipation, a craving. And that is when a habit has really taken hold.
Okay, so now that we have this framework, let's go back to Eugene, because this is what finally solves the mystery of the man without a memory.
Check this out. In another experiment, scientists would show him two objects, and one was always the correct one.
He got it right 95% of the time, but here's the kicker. He had absolutely no memory of ever doing the test before. When they asked him how he knew which one to pick, he just said, "It's here somehow or another," and the hand goes for it. He couldn't explain it because his conscious brain wasn't doing the work. It was his basal ganglia. It had learned the habit.
And this habit loop explains his daily walk perfectly. Think about it. The cue? Seeing the trees at the corner of his block. The routine? Walking that same familiar path every day. And the reward? That feeling of satisfaction and familiarity when he arrived back at his own front door. He didn't need a map in his head, he had a habit loop burned into his brain. You know, Eugene's story totally changed how scientists thought about behavior. It was the proof they needed that we're not just driven by memory and reason. So much of what we do is run by these habits, stored in a totally different system in our brain. So what does all this mean for you? Well, it's everything, really. Because if you understand this loop, you hold the key to actually controlling the habits in your own life. But here's the thing. Habits are a total double-edged sword. On one hand, they're amazing. They save us so much brain power, right? That's how you can drive a car and have a conversation at the same time. But the downside, and it's a big one, is that your brain doesn't know the difference between a good habit and a bad one. And the really tricky part is that bad habits never really go away. They're just kind of lurking in there, waiting for the right cue to pop back up. And that brings us to the most important point of all this. The real power here isn't trying to fight a bad habit with willpower. It's about understanding its structure. If you can learn to spot the cues and figure out what reward your brain is really craving, then you can start to consciously change the routine in the middle. So really, it all comes down to this. Your entire life, from the moment you wake up to how you deal with people, is basically built on a series of these habit loops. So the question is, now that you know how they work,